Hello girls, welcome back, and this is our third online lesson. In our second lesson we focused on Queen Victoria, on the life of this important queen who gave her name to an entire age, and we focused on the most important events in her life and on how she changed the role of monarchy, the role of a queen in England, and on the effects of her behavior, of her being a symbol of an age. And today we're focusing on the Victorian age, so on the most important social, economical, political changes that happened during this very long period of the British history. I would like to remind you that we are speaking of a period which lasted for more than 60 years, which started with her coronation, okay, in 1837, and which ended with her death, so in January 1901, at the very beginning of the new century. As I usually do, girls, I will share with you my desktop, and you will see that here on my desktop I have here a presentation. Don't forget that you will be able to find exactly the same presentation, and I know that you already know it, okay? Sorry, you will find the same presentation on or in the folder that I shared with you in Didattica, okay? The title of the presentation, that in your case is a PDF file, is Victorian underscore context, okay? The Victorian Age. As I have already said, it is a long period of time which takes its name from Queen Victoria, who was the queen during this very long period. And somebody will probably ask me a question. Teacher, why did you say that the Victorian age started in 1837 and ended in 1901? If here on the slide, on the very first of the slides that you are showing us, there is another year. Here we can see that the Victorian age is said to have begun in 1830. Why? I will tell you, because this year, 1830, was the beginning of a period of social reforms which affected the age itself. So in 1830, Victoria was not yet Queen of England, but some kind of social, political, most of all social, economical reforms started, and these reforms changed the face of Britain, most of all during her reign. Okay, that's the reason why here and in most of your textbooks you will see that the Victorian age usually, okay, is said to have begun in 1830 and not in 1837 with the coronation of Victoria. As we said in our last lesson, Victoria became queen when she was only 18 years old, and we said that she was an independent young woman, she was self-assured, she was very well educated, and we have also said that her reign was not the longest because she has been overcome by Queen Elizabeth II, but used to be the longest in British history. We already said, it's a kind of summary that I'm doing, that she married her cousin, okay, a prince of German origins whose name was Albert, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg, and you know that in 16 years they had 9 children, Her very first daughter was named Victoria after her mother, and even though she was the richest a person in the world, even though she was an empress, she was a queen, her family, the royal family, provided a model of modest life and of respectability. What the family showed the world, most of all their people, was this example of modest family life and respectability, which was shared by the people or by the middle class, respectable people of the Victorian age. If I need a word or to describe the Victorian age, I can think mostly of the word changes. Changes, cambiamenti. Why? Because even though it was a very long period, or because it was a long period, during this time Britain changed dramatically. It was a period of changes. A lot of things changed in Britain during this long period of more than 60 years. And it was a period of changes, and the other word which comes to my mind if I think of the Victorian age is for sure the word differences, contrasts. It was a period of deep changes, dramatic changes, and of really deep contrasts. Contrasts between two parts of the population, two parts of the subjects, two words, two sets of mind, two sets of rules. So contrasts and changes. Then, little by little, when we talk about or when we say something more about the features, the characteristics of this age, you will see and I will focus on the importance of these two words, which come to my mind when I think of the Victorian age. I repeat, changes and contrasts. Don't forget them. Keep them in mind because little by little we will understand the importance of these two words. Okay? Which was the most important or one of the most important changes during the Victorian age? It was, as you can see here in this slide, the growth of the British Empire. The growth, la crescita of the British Empire. We said that Queen Victoria became the Empress of Britain and India. And England, in this period, during the Victorian age, most of all during the first half of the Victorian age, grew and became the greatest nation on earth. The greatest. Not only the greatest, so dealing with its dimension, with the extension of the nation, but the greatest also dealing with the power. So it became the greatest, the biggest, the wealthiest. Wealthiest means the richest, and also the most powerful nation on earth. In fact, as I have already said, and as I want you to remember, is that there was this saying, the sun never sets on England. We have already said why. Because the empire was so big, okay? It stretched from north to south, from west to east, that the sun actually never set on England, okay? And the British Empire at the time of Queen Victoria stretched including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Singapore, Kenya, South Africa, India. It was really enormous, really huge, really big. Don't forget what I told you in the last part of my first lesson about the Victorian age, the Victorian period. I told you that when she died in January 1901, there were about 400,000 subjects in her reign. So her empire was really big, enormous, huge. And why was the extension of the empire so important for Britain? Not only because they had a lot of possessions, a lot of colonies, but because the presence of these colonies affected the economy of England, of Britain. Why? Because the new colonies, we said the colonies, they had colonies in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Kenya, Hong Kong, Singapore, India, okay? All these colonies were an incredible, a huge source of raw materials. Focus on these two words that you can see here. Raw materials, materie prime. So Britain having got these colonies spread around the world, around the globe, had an almost endless, infinite source of raw materials. For example, cotton, silk, gold, metals, iron. All these raw materials were imported from the colonies and got to Britain at a very low cost. Okay, Britain didn't have to pay to import these raw materials because they were British. They were made, they were taken in their colonies. So all these raw materials were imported, arrived in Britain were transformed, were changed into finished goods. Focus on these two words that you can see here, finished goods, prodotti finiti, and then they were exported again as finished goods to other countries around the world. You can understand what the tie between the colonies and the power, the commercial power, the economic power of the British Empire were. Okay, so a lot of colonies, I repeat, meant a lot of raw materials, the possibility of a lot of raw materials getting to England, getting to Great Britain. Don't forget that Great Britain, and we have studied it, was the core, was the heart of the Industrial Revolution, of the new technologies, of the changes, of the new factories. And here in Britain, in the new factories, in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, these raw materials which were taken in the colonies arrived and were changed into finished goods. Okay, then these finished goods were sold, were exported again. And for this reason, little by little, the British Empire became the richest in the whole world. Okay? Focus on this slide and let's focus on the fact that by the mid of the 19th century, Great Britain became the largest exporter and importer of goods in the whole world. The largest exporter and at the same time the largest importer of goods in the world. It imported, we have already said, raw material from its colonies, and it exported finished goods. In this period, so by the mid of the 19th century, Britain was the primary manufacturer of goods and also the wealthiest country in the world. The primary manufacturer, what does it mean? That the factories in Britain produced, changed, manufactured, okay, the raw materials and made finished products, finished goods. For this reason, thanks to the colonies and thanks to the power of the new factories, of the new system of production that we studied when we talked about the Romantic Age, okay, the age of revolutions, thanks to the power of the new system of production, I was saying England, Britain became the wealthiest, the richest country in the world. And the importance of the colonies, the importance of the trading with the colonies, of importing, exporting, is strictly linked, connected, tied with with something which changed in the mindset of the British. That is, that the British people started to feel like a duty, okay, the possibility to bring the customs, the laws, the values, the religion of English people to the races, to the other races around the world. These races were considered savage races, inferior ones. India, for example, Africa, for example, Kenya, for example, South Africa, Hong Kong, Singapore. All the people who lived there were almost usually considered inferior, savage. And this kind of new imperialism also became a kind of cultural imperialism because England didn't only want to be rich, but it also felt like a kind of duty, here the word, dovere, the possibility to bring, to export not only finished goods, but English religion, values, laws, customs to the population, to the races which were considered inferior around the world. We said that Victorian England or the Victorian Age was a period of contrasts and a period of changes. So the first change was this economical one that is linked to the social one, but an important or some important changes are or were the ones which affected society and politics. So in this age there were a lot of important, fundamental, basic social and political reforms. The first of which, okay, so some people, some historians say that the Victorian Age was born or started in 1830, 1832, was the first Reform Act. I want to remember them all. they are really important. The first Reform Act, it was issued, okay, in 1832, and the first Reform Act granted the right to vote to almost all the male members of middle class. Almost all the male members of the middle class. What does it mean? Women, okay, were not allowed to vote. There was not this dispute, okay, they didn't want to, okay, in this moment, or only some of them wanted to. Do you remember, for example, when we studied Mary Shelley, we said that her mother, okay, wrote, okay, something dealing with the possibility of the improvement for women, okay, on the vindication of the right of women. And in this moment, in 1832, don't forget that Queen Victoria was not queen yet in 1832, because she became queen in 1837. In 1832, there was this first Reform Act. It granted the right to vote to male, okay, so to men, male members of which class? Of the middle class. Don't forget that the middle class was the new, okay, it was not new, okay, but it had been new during the previous century. It was the class made of merchants, it was the class made of bankers, of people, of factory owners, of tradesmen, of people who were rich enough. They were allowed to vote. So the right to vote depended on the genre, okay, so if they were male, they could vote, and on the income, on the money that they got. Then, always before the coronation of Queen Victoria in 1833, there was another important act. This act was the Factory Act. Okay, the Factory Act was a very important social act because it started to give a kind of regulation, to set some rules, to limit the child labor in factories. Do you remember, for example, when we studied Blake, when we said that a lot of people worked, a lot of children worked in the factories. Why? Because they could be paid less, because they didn't have rights, because they could help their families, because their hands and their fingers were so small that they could do things that the adults couldn't do, okay? And a lot of children were used as workers in the factories. We said a lot of them worked, and their labor was not regulated. But in 1833, and this is a kind of symptom that something was changing in the British society, there was a first regulation, a first limit imposed to the child labor in factories in Britain. Then, the following year, so in 1834, there was an act that was an amendment of a previous law, an amendment of the Poor Law. Okay, and this amendment in 1834 established a system of, and I want you to underline it and to remember it because it is fundamental for Dickens and for what we are doing later on, established a system of workhouses. Please underline this word, write it down, enlight it, do whatever you want, but the amendment of the Poor Law Act in 1834, which established a system of workhouses for poor people, is really fundamental, really important. So note it down, take a note, underline it, and we will focus on it when we speak of Dickens. Okay. So remember, workhouses, a system of workhouses for poor people. Then let's go on with this kind of list of the most important political and social reforms which characterized the long Victorian age. Another one which was really important and which happened after the coronation of Queen Victoria, so in 1867, was the Second Reform Act. So we said that the first Reform Act was in 1832, and it granted the vote to almost all male members of middle class, while after some years, after more than 30 years actually, after 35 years, in 1867, there was the Second Reform Act. It, little by little, enlarged the right to vote. Allargò, si dice in italiano? Allargò, estese, ecco, enlarged the right to vote, il diritto di voto. To what? Or to whom? To the skilled working man. So, we are speaking of men, no women allowed to vote, but not only the richest part of the middle class, but also to the skilled working man. What does it mean, skilled? Okay, this word here. The skills are what we call le competenze, le capacità, ok? Ciò che si sa fare. Quindi la manodopera specializzata. All the working men who were skilled, who had specific, particular working skills, were allowed to vote. So little by little there is this spread of the right to vote. The right to vote is enlarged. Then another important act, a social and economical and political act which characterizes this period is in 1871, and it is the Trade Union Act. The trade unions are were considered the modern sindacati. Okay, so unions of people doing the same activity, having the same job, having the same interests, okay, in the field of job, of work. And these unions of workers, okay, were legalized. They were made legal. They were legalized so people could gather, could stay together, could speak of their problems, and could also try to propose solutions, to propose something to solve their problems. Okay, then let's go to another important act, which is maybe the last that we're talking about, that is the Third Reform Act. So if I ask you, and I will ask you, how many reform acts do we have in the Victorian age, you will have to listen the three of them. The first in 1832, the second in 1867, and the third in 1884. Okay, all of them enlarged little by little the right to vote. In fact, in 1884, thanks to the Third Reform Act, the right to vote was extended, was granted to all the male householders. Always male, as you can see here, so no women, okay, no female, but male. Householders. Who are the householders? The holders of the houses, the people who owned, who possessed, who had an house. All the people who owned houses, or an house, also as very tiny one, a very small one, could vote, had the right to vote. So one of the characteristics of all these changes in Victorian Britain is this extension of the right to vote, progressively, little by little, to wider people. Okay, and that's what happened. More and more people were allowed to vote. Another characteristic of all these political and social reforms was this kind of social awareness. Social awareness. Consapevolezza, you already know this word, awareness, consapevolezza sociale. Why can we say that there was this higher level of social awareness? Firstly, as you can see here, because people understood that together they had a kind of power. The workers together in the trade unions could change their condition. Okay, and then they also started to understand the importance of limiting the child labor. For example, as you can see here, in 1833 there was this Factory Act. Then, thanks to the Poor Law Amendment, a system of workhouses for poor people was established. So there was a kind of social conscience, awareness, and a political one. Little by little, society was changing, actually. I would go on with it, and I would like to focus on another word that I asked you to keep in mind, that is not only changes but also contrasts. Okay, do you remember what I told you at the beginning of the lesson? Try to keep in mind these two words that, in my opinion, characterize the age we are talking about. And this is the second one, contrasts. Why have I used this word contrasts? Because the Victorian age was an age of contrasts. We said that the Romantic age was the age of revolutions. This is the age of contrasts. Contrasts between positive and negative aspects. There are obviously a lot of positive aspects in this age. We said that Britain was rich. It was extremely rich, very rich, the richest, the wealthiest, the most powerful nation in the whole world. We said that there were a lot of people working, that a lot of people were improving their social and economical condition, but what was the other side of the coin? Okay, in English we say of the coin. There were a lot of negative aspects in this kind of society, and now we are listing them all. I'm trying to summarize them all. Okay, let's focus with this slide on the positive aspects of the age. The first, it was the Industrial Revolution. We know when the Industrial Revolution had started. We have already said, we have stated it more than once, that England was the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and in the Victorian age the Industrial Revolution went on. The factories, the system of production changed dramatically. The factory system emerged. So, a system of factories, and for the very first time, there were more people in Britain living in cities, in industrialized cities, than in the countryside. Do you remember what we said when we started to study, to say something about the Industrial Revolution? We said that the Industrial Revolution can be considered a revolution because in less than 20 years, England changed from a mainly agricultural country into an industrialized country. There was this shift of population from the countryside to the industrial cities, and now, during the Victorian age, as you can see here in this part of the slide, for the very first time in Britain's history, there were more people living in industrialized cities and towns than people living in the countryside. So the Industrial Revolution was at its best. Then, another positive aspect, don't forget that now we are focusing on the positive aspects of this Victorian age, were for sure the technological advances. The technological advances. We know that the technological advances were fundamental for the Industrial Revolution, okay, for the creation of this new factory system. And progresso tecnologico, scoperte, invenzioni, okay? For example, steam hammers and locomotives were introduced in the factory production, in the factory system. Steam hammers, martelli a vapore, okay, locomotives, locomotive. There was in this period the first train, okay, and the trains were very important, were fundamental. In fact, a new system, a new network of railways was built in England. A new network of railways. What do I mean when I say a new network of railways? I mean a network, una rete, of railways, strade ferrate, ferrovie, which connected what? The harbors, I porti, which were on the coast, with the factories which were in the country or near, for example, the coal fields. Okay, why? We said that a lot of raw materials got to England, got to Britain, coming directly from the colonies. So from Singapore, India, Australia, and Canada, and all the colonies which Britain possessed had, they got to England and they got to harbors. Okay, then this system, this network of railways allowed the raw materials to get to the factories where they were changed into finished goods. This was another improvement of the period. Okay, another positive aspect of the age. So these technological advances, this building of a network of railways, also also going from one place to the other, not only for the goods but also for the people, became cheaper and faster, obviously. Which was another fundamental positive aspect of the age we are dealing with. It was basically the economical progress. We have already said, but I'm not tired of repeating it, Britain was the greatest economical power in the world. During the Victorian age, Britain was the biggest, the greatest economical power in the whole world. Then, with the beginning of the new century in 1901, the USA, the United States of America, became the leader. But even in that period, Britain remained the first in manufacturing. Okay, but don't forget that during the Victorian age, Britain, thanks to its colonies, basically, was the greatest economical power in the world. And the symbol of this great economical power, the symbol of this powerful, rich Britain, was a building. The building that you can see here in this photo on the right of the screen, it is the Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace, what is called il Palazzo di Vetro, il Palazzo di Cristallo. If you go to London now, you will not be able to see it because it was destroyed by fire in 1936. But this palace, this huge palace made of iron and glass, iron and glass, respecting which were the characteristics of the architecture, of the iron architecture of the time. Penso che l'abbiate studiata, mi auguro di sì, in storia dell'arte e l'architettura del ferro, ok? I hope so. So respecting which were the characteristics of the iron architecture of the time, it was built to host the Great Exhibition of 1851. The Great Exhibition. The Great Exhibition was a great exhibition. It was a kind of expo, general expo, as the one which was held in Milan, in Italy, okay? And this crystal palace made of iron and glass was built um, to house the Great Exhibition that took place in England in 1851. It was really big, it was huge, and in it a lot of new technologies were exhibited. New locomotives, new tools, industrial tools, new steamboat, new engine, new hydraulic presses, all the products of new technologies, all the new technologies which were developed in England were exhibited in the Crystal Palace. And this Crystal Palace, why did I say that it was a symbol? Because it actually was a symbol. It was the symbol of the power, of the supremacy of Britain in the world. It was the symbol of how powerful, how strong, how rich Britain was in the world. And this is the symbol of the positive side of the Victorian age. But don't forget the word contrasts. The word contrasts, which I have said is one of the words which best characterizes this period. I said that as opposing, okay, with the positive aspects, there were negative aspects. Let's focus on them. The first, a lot of industrial production, industrial revolution, new technologies, and what is the other side of the coin? It is the incredible level of pollution. For the first time, Europe, England is polluted, inquinata. It is the very first time that the levels of pollutions could not be controlled, and the pollution was clear, most of all in cities and in industrialized towns. Why? Because the pollution was due to factory activity. Due to factory activity, a lot of factories and a lot of pollution. Don't forget that the factories use the steam, the energy, was vapore, the steam, and to produce steam they needed coal, carbone. For this reason, there was a lot of the pollution due to the factory activities. For example, don't forget that I always tell my students, but I think that I have already told you, that in this moment the expression grey London smoke, smoke of London, was used for the first time. The sky of London or in London was constantly grey because of the ashes due to the factory activities, the ashes coming out of chimneys. Okay, so huge factories, huge chimneys, all of them working a lot of hours a day or all day long, and producing this smoke and these ashes which were pulled in the sky, which were thrown in the sky. Okay, so pollution. And together with the pollution, we have to focus on another negative aspect of the age, that is, as you can see in this slide, the total, complete lack of hygienic conditions. Lack. This word is mancanza, okay, of hygienic conditions. I remember that we already said something about it when we started to speak about the negative aspects of the Industrial Revolution, and I want to focus on them also now because the conditions were not improving actually, but were worse and worse. Why? Because the houses, most of all in the cities, were overcrowded. Do you remember this word, overcrowded? I know that you remember it because we have already used it. And most of the people, most of the factory workers lived in these overcrowded houses and in really miserable conditions. Don't forget, miserable doesn't stand for miserabile, but very sad. Okay. The houses were very poor. Sometimes they didn't have windows, they didn't have glass on the windows, and they shared water supplies. Shared, condividevano water supplies, riserve d'acqua. There were no toilets. All the things that were produced were thrown out of the windows. So a lot of epidemics spread in this period. As you can see here in this slide, epidemics like typhoid, cholera, and they caused a high mortality, most of all in towns. Why? Because of what we have said before, the lack of hygienic condition, the fact that people lived in overcrowded houses without water, for example, without hygienic services. And the peak of these epidemics was what in England, what in London was called the Great Stink. Great Stink, il grande puzzo. Okay. It happened in London in 1858, and the expression the Great Stink was used to describe the awful, terrible smell which invaded London in that year, in 1858, coming from the miasmas in the River Thames. Miasmas. They were exhalation from decaying matter. They didn't only stink, but they actually poisoned the air. These exhalations didn't only stink, that was their most immediate effect, but they actually poisoned, avvelenavano the air, okay? And they were all the exhalations coming of the decaying matter, il materiale che si decomponeva in the water of the River Thames. All the decaying matter coming out of factories. Okay. This part I want to jump over because it is what we are doing next time. And next time we are speaking about the culture, the cultural movements which developed during this age. We are speaking of the Victorian compromise, but for now the most important things, the most important characteristics of the Victorian age have been I think explained. Now what I want you to do, okay, I have already told you. Let me close here. Let's go back to us, to my face. What I want to tell you is to listen to these two parts of the lesson. The first part dealing with Queen Victoria's life, the second part dealing with the most important reforms, changes in Victorian England. Then answer the questions that I've given you. Okay, taking notes, writing down, trying to summarize, and most of all, doing the activities in your homework. Everything is in the folder, so please do the activities, do everything, and we will correct them together next Wednesday, so on Wednesday the 24th of March from 11 to about 12:30, okay, p.m. So guys, bye bye and take care. See you.